Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us today. We have a lot of information to cover. This is Mixing It Up with MiRealSource. And my name is Taylor Fedowa. I do our communications at MiRealSource here. And my co-host is Colleen DeLang.
Good morning, everybody.
And our guest presenter, speaker, discussing some changes that have been happening in the industry effective as of today and how MiRealSource is responding and some ways to answer your questions, some suggestions is our very own CEO, Dave DeRees.
Good morning, everybody.
And so how these Mixing It Ups usually go is we just sort of have a presenter, or we have topics that we cover and demonstrate. There's also trivia questions throughout and prizes that we give away. Colleen, do you want to go over kind of how the GoToWebinar platform works for them?
Yeah, absolutely. First, before we get started, let's make sure everybody can hear us. Can somebody just type in the question box that you can hear us? There is a question box to the right that's kind of perfect. Thank you so much. There is a question box. Now you know where it is if you just typed good morning and that you can hear us. There's a question box in your GoToWebinar panel. And what we're going to do is we're going to take turns between the three of us answering your questions. We'd also like Dave to address the hard questions, so feel free to type those in there. And that way we can keep you updated on things that are rapidly evolving, and that's obviously what we're here to talk about, what's going on in the industry, what it means, some of the changes that have recently happened. You'll notice in your GoToWebinar panel, not only can you ask questions and we can respond to them, but you'll see some handouts that we've attached. Some of the recent MAR forms are there. I wrote a document yesterday on how to add some of those forms into your packets. We're going to cover all of that. And then the cool thing is we do some prizes and some giveaways for people who get the trivia questions correct. So we got a lot of fun stuff. So with that, I think we could probably turn it over to Dave. Are you all set with that, Taylor?
Yeah, yep. We've had a busy week, haven't we, Dave?
Yes. So at roughly about 3 o'clock on what day was that? Tuesday, we got the toolkit from the Michigan Realtors entitled Safely Reopening Real Estate Toolkit. And basically what it included was changing the way realtors conduct business, which we'll go over. Then there was a showings addendum, there was a showing certification, and some FAQs. We'll go over the highlights on those. So if we can have the slides put up. There we go.
Can you see that okay, Dave?
Yeah, I can see it. Yep.
Perfect.
All right. So the first document in this toolkit was the changing the way realtors conduct business. And there was some of these things are also directly from the governor's order. So the first thing that I wanted to just highlight is that going forward for showings, no more than 4 persons may be at the property at one time. And the way it was worded in the governor's order was it's limited to no more than 4 people on the premises at any one time. And the interpretation that most people are taking on this is people includes everybody. So that would include your buyers, it would include the agent, it would include sellers if sellers are there. However, later on, they are encouraging people to ask the sellers to not be there, and then if the sellers are not there, they wouldn't add to that count. The next thing is that we can't do this for rentals, so you can't, if the rental is occupied, you may not arrange an in-person showing of a rental unit. The next one is realtors are encouraged to avoid consecutive multiple showings in order to avoid overlapping appointments. The default for showing time has already been set to not allow overlapping appointments. However, there's also this idea of avoiding consecutive multiple showings. And that's because later on in the next document, you'll find that they want the seller to disinfect and sanitize the house before and after any showings. And if you have back-to-back showings, that would make that difficult. So when they say avoid consecutive showings, that means you might need to have a break in between the showings. The next, and Colleen, when we get to that point, you can show them how to do that, right?
Correct.
Okay. The other thing is to encourage sellers to not be present at the showing. That goes along with keeping the count down so that you're either at or underneath the 4 people being on the premises. It also says to ask sellers to clean and disinfect all frequently touched surfaces prior to and after the showing. Now that phrase that you're seeing there about the sellers disinfecting, that flows through many of these documents. So it's on this document, it's on the next one, which is the addendum to the listing agreement. It's also in I think the FAQ. So that follows through quite a few of these documents. Okay, all right. You want to go to the next slide?
Absolutely.
And we did include, you guys did include these as handouts to this webinar, right?
Yes, sir, I did. I put in not only the forms that you're going to go over, I put in the toolkit, and I also put in the how-tos of how to add them right into your form packages.
Okay, good. So I'm just hitting highlights. I'm not going over every single paragraph. So when you get a chance after this, please read it word for word. But we're hitting the highlights right now. So this next document is an addendum. If it's a new listing, it's an addendum. If it's a listing that you already had, it's an amendment. So that's why they say it's an addendum/amendment to the listing agreement. This is for the seller to sign. And right off the bat, number 1 is the choice that the seller has to make, whether they want to allow in-person showings or whether they do not want to allow in-person showings. The big the big takeaway for that first option, if the seller wants to authorize in-person showings, is the place where it says the seller hereby agrees to release, defend, to hold harmless the brokerage, so that'd be the listing brokerage, and any cooperating brokers and their respective agents and employees from any and all claims and liability resulting from the exposure to COVID-19. So that is the big takeaway from that paragraph, is the release and hold harmless for liability, not only for the listing broker, but also for the cooperating broker. And we'll also notice there's a similar thing on the next one, which is for buyers. So on the one that the seller signs, they're releasing from liability not just their own agent and broker, listing broker, but also the cooperating broker. And the same thing happens in the next one, where the buyer is releasing not only their agent that is there, working with the buyer, but it also releases the liability for the listing agent. So it's a two-way street on both of these documents, and that's how everyone gets protection from the liability aspect of it. All right, so the next option there is the seller can elect to not have in-person showings, and then they would do virtual showings. The next one that I want to highlight is number 3. Number 3 talks about the seller agrees to notify the brokerage, that'd be the listing brokerage, if any person occupying or entering their property has been exposed to, diagnosed, quarantined, or is experiencing fever, cough, shortness of breath, or other cold or flu-like symptoms. And the question here is, this is kind of like the certification on the buyer side. Both sides are, in essence, certifying as it relates to the health of the people that are going to be on the premises. I refer to this one as kind of the hot potato. So if the seller tells you, yes, someone in the household is sick, then what do you do with that information? And says in that event that it should be quarantined, which means you'd have to go into showing time and change it so that it cannot be an in-person showing anymore for the quarantine period recommended by the CDC. You will probably have to look to your brokerage, to see what their policies are, and the brokerage may contact their legal counsel for making sure they have a policy about what to do with this information, because it is kind of like a hot potato. Once you have that information, making sure that you know what to do with it, and you can keep track of it in case it becomes an issue at a later point. And that goes for all of these. These are forms that were drafted by the Michigan Realtors, and I know that many brokers are going to be using these. Other brokers are going to be using a different version. They might have their own version of these. So before you use these, contact your brokerage and find out what your brokerage policy is. Do they want you to use these Michigan Realtor forms, or do they want you to use your own brokerage forms? Find out what the policy is. But I know that there's going to be some that use the Michigan Realtor forms, some will use their own forms, or some variation or combination of the two. All right.
Dave,
and
do you mind if we jump in with a question here?
Yep, go ahead.
We've got a lot of the same questions, so let me ask it. Dana asked, just to be clear, so you're saying that the seller has to disinfect between the showings?
They did make a point of being clear, very clear on that. And let me go at the very bottom. This is a 1.5 page document. If we go to the second page, just in case anybody didn't really know what they meant, that's the other part that I highlighted under recommended practices for sellers. So not only are they agreeing to do it in the, what was that? That was paragraph 2. In paragraph 2, before they sign, they're signing that they're agreeing to do it. And then under the recommended practices, they go even deeper and explain it. And yeah, that highlighted one says prior to and after any showings, clean and disinfect all touched surfaces. So yes, the way this is drafted, yes, it would mean the seller is agreeing to that obligation.
Great, okay. And I know we had, go ahead, Taylor.
One question, let me find it, because I know we've been responding to some of them. So if the seller works all day and the home is not sanitized between showings, do we have a suggested solution for this scenario? The home is vacant, the seller is not going to drive over to sanitize between showings, same kind of issue.
Yeah, that would be something that you would look to your brokerage policy on. What we're doing is the MLS is making sure that we communicate to you how you can make these changes, change these settings inside the MLS. But these documents that we're reviewing today were just released by the Michigan Realtors at 3 o'clock on Tuesday. We put something out yesterday about them and scheduled for me to talk about them today. So this is all moving extremely fast. But yeah, the MLS, we do not have a policy or a position on these. These are either you're going to follow the Michigan Realtors recommendations and use their forms, or you're going to follow your brokerage policies and your brokerage forms. But the MLS, what we do is communicate the data, and the data as it relates to showings and showing time. We'll show you that in a few minutes, but we don't have a position on these policies.
But based on this document, that's really what it sounds like it's saying, is that anytime you have a showing in between the people, you are, as the seller, taking responsibility to sanitize.
If you're going to, yes, if you're going to sign this amendment that was put together by the Michigan Realtors, then yes, the seller is taking on that obligation. If the seller doesn't want to take on that obligation, there may be some other method that is in a brokerage policy, or they always have the ability to elect to say, no, I can't do that, so I'm going to not allow in-person showings, and I'm going to stick with virtual showings, and then make it subject to the purchaser seeing it after they present an offer or something like that.
So Dave, we have a question from Jan. She's saying, are you saying one showing per day? I think that's a question, but that was her question.
No, I don't think it means one showing per day. I think what they were trying to get at, where they made the comment about no overlapping showings and trying not to have consecutive showings, in other words, back-to-back showings, you have the ability in showing time to allow showings like a half an hour here, skip a half an hour, and then a half an hour later. There's the ability, you have the flexibility in showing time to do that. You could have breaks in between each one that would allow that to happen between each showings, which is what they had in that first document where they said to not have consecutive showings. That's the way I would interpret that.
Now, from a buyer standpoint, sorry,
go ahead, Taylor.
Were you going to address that one? So from a buyer standpoint, there's a question. Somebody already has 2 showings scheduled today for their buyer. Does that buyer have to sign that form? Do you want to talk about
the form we were just going over is the addendum / amendment to the listing agreement. So this is just between the seller and the listing agent. This is not the one for the buyer. We're going to get to the one for the buyer in a minute, but there was some questions about does the buyer need to know this, because there is this idea that the seller is certifying that nobody is sick in the household, and it is something that somebody could request. There is the ability to put this document in the document section of showing time, which I think Colleen can show us later. So that could happen, but I think that you'll also see that when we get over to the one for the buyer. So why don't we go to the one for the buyer?
Let's double check and make sure we answered.
Before we do that, there's another seller question.
Yep.
So basically I'll kind of rephrase Michelle's question, but this seems to relate to occupied, but what if the home isn't occupied is kind of what a lot of the questions are referring to. So you're saying homes obviously need to be cleaned. And I know this was my question yesterday as an agent too. Homes need to be cleaned before and after showings, but what if the home is an estate, or what if it isn't occupied? What are you suggesting there, Dave?
Okay, well, first off, let's keep in mind, I'm not suggesting anything. What I'm doing is reviewing the Michigan Realtors forms. I will, however, say that not in the governor's order, there's no mention or distinction for vacant homes. And from what I can see in the Michigan Realtors documents, there's no distinction for vacant homes. My guess is that's because even if it was sanitized and disinfected in the beginning of the day, and it's a vacant home, if several people had showings, they could have touched surfaces and it could have become infected by the end of the day. So the fact that it's vacant is, not really a guarantee that it's not got a problem as it relates to COVID-19, which is why I think there is no distinction in the governor's order. There's no distinction to vacant homes for
I
any,
have
for
to
anything.
I have to address another question from one of my favorite people. Ursula asks, it appears that this may create some legal liability, imposing conditions on the seller that they may not be able to perform in all showings. So again, it's more of a statement, but it is definitely something to see your broker on and ask that question.
To see your broker and see what your broker's policy is. But again, this wasn't drafted. Remember, this was drafted by the Michigan Realtors, and they put it in the form of an option. Paragraph number 1, it gives the seller the option. So obviously, if they feel they can't abide by the obligations in this agreement, then they would not select option number 1 for in-person showings. They would select the second option, the way this form is drafted. And again, you got to remember that the Michigan Realtors probably spent a lot of time. They have several attorneys on staff. I'm sure they spent a lot of time on this, and this is what they put out. But just like, the Michigan Realtors also provide purchase agreements and other documents, some of our members use those. Some of our members draft their own purchase agreements. And the same thing is going to happen with this. Some brokers will use these Michigan Realtors forms. Some brokers will, with their legal counsel, probably draft their own forms. But this is what we have today. Today, all I have to review is what has been provided by the Michigan Realtors.
And to circle back to Ursula's comment or statement too, there are, like you said, there are options. You might have a client who is high risk and just is not comfortable with this, or just not comfortable with this in general. So the fact that there are so many virtual options available in the MLS and what we've been teaching, it's important to inform your sellers of all of their options.
Yes, you are right. There are many sellers that not all sellers are in the same position. Some sellers have underlying conditions. Some have immune compromises. Some have had other medical reasons that make them higher risk. That's why I believe that Michigan Realtors drafted this in such a way that it's giving the seller the option and doing what's best for them and what's best for them in their particular circumstance, which might include medical reasons why they may not be comfortable with in-person showings at this time. But that's why I think they gave the option to the seller. Okay.
All
Just
right.
like a good question from you, from Wynn, just asking if there's a way to have it automatically set up in showing time to leave an hour window between each showing. Is that something that they can auto do, or do they have to manually go in and do that?
Colleen, I'll let Colleen answer that, but I believe they have to structure that in showing time. Colleen, you want to answer that?
Yeah, there is a setting, and I can actually show that. There is a setting to never allow overlapping showings, but it's not smart enough because the showing windows could be different varying times. One agent could maybe set it up for 30 minutes. Another agent may set their showing for an hour. So it doesn't automatically block out, don't show it again for an hour. But what I would recommend is that you confirm that as the agent so that you can leave that half-hour time or hour time. Because remember, you're also going to have to work with the seller on their schedule if they occupy the home to make sure that they're able to clean those surfaces in between. So it's not as easy as the other settings where you can just click it and it will automatically do it. That is not currently in place.
Well, the not allowing overlapping setting, that has already been turned on. That's already in a default mode. So that one's there. But the one for leaving time in between, so there's not back-to-back or consecutive showings. That one you would have to do individually, manually, and we can show that after we get through these other forms.
Yep.
So do we want to go to the buyer one?
Well, let's go.
Let's
Do you want to talk about this or come back to this?
I think we should
Oh.
talk about it now while we're in the.
All right, yeah.
Yeah, while we're
okay.
talking about the sellers, let's talk about
While
it
we're
here.
talking about the sellers, as you probably know by now, there are 3 different ways you can set this up. Again, after you've discussed it with your seller. So you've discussed it with your seller. You've either had the seller sign the Michigan Realtor agreement amendment, or you have them sign your brokerage if your brokerage has gotten with their legal counsel and done their own. Whatever it is, you're going to then have these 3 options. One is an in-person together with a virtual appointment. In other words, you can do either or both. Or the next one is virtual appointments only. So that one would be, for example, if the seller selected the second option on paragraph 1 of the amendment, you would select that one. Or if they want to have in-person appointments only, then you can select that one. But this selection needs to be done by the listing agent or the admin after they have had the communication and direction from their seller.
Okay.
Okay.
On to the buyer.
I think this question here, Dave, is just kind of, it's kind of going to go back to check with their broker, but also a lot of this is dependent on the seller's responsibility from this document. But the Pete says if we are to show a vacant home to prospective buyers, are we as agents required to go in ahead of time to disinfect for the safety of our clients and the protection of our brokerage from liability?
The way the Michigan Realtors documents are put together, the answer would be no, because they're putting that obligation on the seller. I would be careful and check with your broker and your broker policy to see if your broker is all right with you taking on that responsibility. In other words, if you're going to cross that off and say, okay, as an agent, I'll be the one responsible for disinfecting. You might want to check with your broker to see if your broker is okay with you taking on that obligation and that liability.
We have heard from some brokers, right, Dave, that they do not want the agents. A couple questions came in on that just now. You really got to check with your broker, because some brokers are adamantly telling their agents not to be the one responsible for going in and cleaning the home in between appointments. They were very adamant about that.
Yeah, that would be a broker policy. I do know that some brokers have already come down with their policy is they do not want their agents to take the responsibility and then the liability for the cleaning. But again, check with your brokerage, as everything comes down to a broker's individual policy on how they want to handle this. But the answer to the question was the way the Michigan Realtors forms are put together, it does not put the obligation on the agent, it puts the obligation on the seller. Okay, let's go on to the buyer release. Now, this one, you'll notice that the first one that we went over, that was an amendment to the listing agreement. It was a listing agreement and the seller was going to sign it. This one is not an amendment to any contract. This is different. This is a showing certification and release that is signed by the buyer. And the first, let me get my version of it up here.
Oh, before we move on to the buyers, let's do a trivia or a giveaway.
Hey,
Okay.
cool.
Can I steal the screen, you guys?
Steal away.
All right. Give you a minute, Dave, to get your notes in front of you as well.
Yep.
And I love when we get to give away prizes. That's always my favorite part.
Yeah, lightens it up a little bit with all of this legal talk. So, like I mentioned, we do the trivia or giveaway items. Any kind of suggestions that you have of ideas too that we can utilize to make it fun for giveaways. But today's giveaway, there's going to be 2 winners. The first trivia or task that we would like for you to do to be a winner is the prize is actually a vintage candy basket. So all vintage candy from the 80s. That's kind of hard to find unless you go into a cool candy store in some tourist town. You can see some of them in normal stores, but a lot of these are throwbacks from the 80s, some candies. So the first prize, this is the prize,
Oh my
but
God,
first,
that is so cute. That is awesome.
that's cute. And it's funny, my husband actually talks about Big League Chew bubble gum all the time. And we go to, we've gone to Pentwater a lot since we've been together, and they have a really cute candy shop downtown Pentwater, and he always gets the Big League Chew when we go in there. So thought this was kind of fun.
I hate to date myself, but yeah, I love the roll behind it where you unroll the bubble gum. It's like it's called the big roll, and yeah.
Yep, the hubba bubba.
Yeah.
Some of these you still see, you know, like the Sour Patch Kids and maybe a ring pop once in a while, but so yeah, this is the prize. This one's a really easy. This isn't trivia. This is just a task for you guys. We have been adding so much content to our YouTube channel, and even more content is going to be coming because we have some things in the works. So if you have not subscribed to MiRealSource Media's YouTube, now is your chance to do that. So the first person that I get notified here, I'm signed into our YouTube. I have all the notifications opened up right here, as you can see. The first person to subscribe will get this basket. So the first person that I see, I will be reaching out to you via email to get your mailing address, and you will be getting this vintage candy basket. So go ahead and go to YouTube, search MiRealSource Media, and there's a subscribe button, and go ahead and subscribe to us. You will not regret it. We put all of these mixing it ups, webinars, we're going to have discussions, a few other things, promo videos, little tutorials on some of our products will all be on here, and then some. I don't have a subscribe button because I'm the manager, one of the managers of the page, but there should be a subscribe button right next to the name. So I'm going to be watching that. Go ahead and do that. And then now I'm going to hand it off to Dave.
Okay, so we're going to go back to talking about the showing, certification, and release.
Give me 1 second.
I'm going to steal. I'm going
Or
to steal this.
Colleen, sorry.
Thank you. All right,
Okay.
give me 1 second to pull it back up. All right, can you see that, Taylor?
Yes.
Yep.
Fantastic. Okay.
Okay, so this is a release of liability. So the first one says that the buyer is assuming the risks associated with possible exposure. Number 2 says that they acknowledge that no more than 4 persons may attend the showing, keeping in mind that the way the governor's order reads, it's a limitation to the people. So that would include the agent and any sellers that are there, although we are going to ask the sellers, you know, not to be present. But that also comes into play when you see down below where there are signature lines. There are 4 signature lines. And what that means is you got 2 places for the buyer and 2 places for an additional person who is present on the premises for the showing. Again, what the governor's order talks about is limiting it to 4, but there's a place for a signature for all 4. So that would include a signature of the agent. And the reason that that's important is number 3 is the people that are going to be present at the showing are going to certify to the best of their knowledge that they're not sick. So and then number 4 continues on regarding the release. It says they hereby release, defend, hold harmless the brokerage. So in this case, the brokerage would be the buyer's broker and agent, but it then goes on to say, and the listing broker and their respective agents and employees from any and all claims and liability resulting from exposure to COVID-19. So even though the buyer and the agent that has the buyer are signing this, it's actually not just protecting them, it's also protecting the listing broker, the listing agent, and the employees of the listing broker. So this idea of a two-way street on the hold harmless and the release of liability is in both of these documents. So I was also asked by somebody, well, if I want to make sure that me as the listing broker, I've got this protection for liability, can I ask to see a copy of this certification before I confirm the appointment? And the answers to that would be, yeah, the listing broker could ask that. And that is the idea behind certification. A certification is meant by definition to be communicated to whoever needs the certification. It's the communication of the certification is part of a certification. Okay, what was, I think that covers this document. Do we have questions about this one, or do we go to the next one?
I think Taylor and I got most of the questions, but again, if you have questions about this, this is your time to ask. So absolutely put your questions in the question panel, and we will go ahead and answer them, or we can address, Dave can address them as well. So feel free to type away. Can I jump to the FAQs? Are you ready for that, Dave?
Yep. And again, we're not going to go over all of the FAQs. We included those in the handouts, so you can go over them. But we're going to look at number 4 again. Can I show rental properties? The way they answered that is it's a yes unless, so it means yes, but no, unless the property is currently occupied, it'd be no. So if it's vacant, the answer would be yes. If there's tenants occupying it, it would be no. All right, next.
Still have to follow all these same guidelines, right? The buyer.
What?
They'd still have to follow all these same guidelines as a potential resident of the rental.
I mean, yeah, all of the social distancing and no more than 4 people and all that would still apply, yes.
All of this still applies to rentals.
Well, it only if it's vacant. You can't schedule an appointment per the governor's order. You cannot schedule an appointment to go in there when there's tenants occupying it.
Ursula mentioned something about somebody who works in the hospital industry, medical industry. They have likely been exposed. Does this mean they can't tour the properties? Anything mentioned about anybody that works in the medical field or essential businesses?
No, there's very specific language in both of these agreements, and this is where you're going to have to look to your broker's policy on what this means. So again, this is like the hot potato because it talks about exposed, diagnosed, quarantine, fever, cough, shortness of breath, or other cold or flu-like symptoms. And that's where it is like a hot potato, because if either the buyer or the seller tell you, yes, I've got cold or flu-like symptoms, then look to your brokerage policy on when and how you're going to deal with that information, because that's like, you know, they put the hot potato in your lap. Now you've got to know what you're going to do with it. But it does go on to say that in the event of such exposure, no in-person showings shall be permitted until the end of the quarantine period. If it's the seller, it would mean you'd have to put the house in quarantine, go into showing time and make sure it says virtual only so that nobody can do an in-person showing. Or if it's the buyer, you'd have to make sure that you don't show that buyer any houses for 14 days. So, but no, there's nothing specifically about anybody's, what they do for a living.
There's some
There's a
good
really
questions that
question.
just
Yeah,
came in.
you want to address that one, Colleen, from Lori?
Sure. Sure. Lori, we were both looking at the same question. Taylor and I
We had
focused
this
in on that.
question
So
on Tuesday. We were trying to figure all this out as well when all of this was released. So this is a very good question from Lori.
yeah, so Lori's question is, can you put multiple addresses on one form if showing more than one home to a buyer that day? So that, it has the address field. I think she's asking, can you put 5 or 6 addresses on that so they're not signing multiple forms?
Again, I didn't draft this. This was drafted by the Michigan Realtors. I don't think it was designed. I don't think the form was designed to be used that way. I would say check with your broker on your broker's policy. And remember that there may be a listing broker who might request to see a copy of this before they confirm the showing. Which is the idea of a certification, is to communicate that certification. So I don't know if you want to show all the addresses for that you're showing those people to any particular listing broker. So yeah, I don't have an answer to that. That's a good question, but I don't have an answer to that one other than check with your broker to find out what their broker policy is with that. And keep in mind, in the back of your mind, that somebody may want to see this, which is the whole idea of a certification, is to be communicated to somebody.
Another good question. Can we have a rental unit? Can a photographer go into a rental unit if it's occupied?
Well, I'm going to say the governor's order, I think the way it's worded, it says any showings, inspections, appraisals, photography, videography, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that because it limits it to everything except rental units, I'm going to guess the answer is no, because that's the way this governor's order was structured. The structure of it, I think, means that they are both of those ideas are without an occupied rental unit. But for the rest of them, anything else, you can have a photographer go in there, again, as long as it's by appointment, and as long as it's less than 4 people, social distancing, all that type of thing.
Okay. A lot of questions about the form and putting multiple addresses on there. Can you just attach a list of the showings to the form? You kind of covered that. On the form, can we just put homes in Michigan? Kind of like that idea.
Check with your broker. Check with your broker. The broker's policy is going to have to be the one that you follow here. I don't think the Michigan Realtors, the way they drafted the form, I don't think that was their intent. So, but I would say you got to check with your own broker policy on that.
All right.
They definitely want a record of every property and so on for any kind of tracking and so on.
Well, one thing you want to do, keep in mind, is that the reason that they put this certification on people's health on here is it could be that if someone at a later date does test positive for the virus, then through contact tracing that is done by the health department, you may have to give up this certification, and it may not be helpful to the government, to the health department, if it doesn't show the property address and the date of the showing, which is the way it was designed to be used by Michigan Realtors.
Okay, I think that's most are statements and things that you've covered, so we can go back and answer those. So I think, did you do question 7 here yet, Dave, on the FAQ?
No, I don't think we got to that one yet.
All
All
right.
right, so this question is, can I open my real estate brokerage office? And the answer from Michigan Realtors is that the governor's order is not limited to listing appointments and showings, but refers more broadly to workers in the real estate industry. That being said, the order does provide that the resumed businesses must promote remote work to the fullest extent possible. So you got to really, really hone in on that. Promote remote work to the fullest extent possible. So if it can be done remotely, according to the governor's order, you're still supposed to be doing it remotely. So you got to think about that in terms of, is there things that I can only do from my office? Then as long as you meet all these criteria that Michigan Realtors has put in there, their opinion is you could do it. But with the overarching idea that if you can do it remotely, you should do it remotely.
Yeah. Everybody do their part in any way they can.
Oh, and just make sure you go over those carefully. Did we include the link? They got a link in there that says here. I don't know if we included that link.
Yes, it's on the PDF documents. I put this whole document that Dave is going over. This is the actual toolkit that was sent out, and the link is there and it will work. So if you open up those documents and you click on that link, it will
Oh,
take you to those I think it was the OSHA and the CDC site.
Great.
Mhm.
Okay, and then the next one was, can I attend the real estate closing with my clients? The real short answer on this one is it depends. It depends on what your broker's policy is, and it depends on what the title company's policy is. So check with your broker, check with your title company, find out what their policy is, and follow those policies. All right, is that it?
There's a question.
One more.
One
Oh.
more. Can I hire a photographer? And it says, although photographers are not expressly included, the governor's order does cover workers in the real estate industry generally. And this is where Michigan Realtors is interpreting this to mean photography work is exempt. In other words, it can be done if it's performed in the context of a real estate transaction. But again, you would have to still follow, when you're there, it's got to be less than 4 people, social distancing, by appointment, all those things still would apply.
All right, we have a question from Jill that says, if we want these to us prior to showings, should we place a comment in the agent remarks or showing times notes?
Yes and yes. And Colleen, can you go and show them where they would put that in showing time?
I can.
And you were going to show them some other things in showing time. Oh, and we were also going to show them where these forms are in both MLS docs and where these forms are in Instanet. Now, Instanet, we were able to get them in Instanet already. For those of you that are using zip form, they're not in there yet. If you're going to use a different form, like if your broker is going to have their own forms, they can have us get those to put in their libraries as well. So just reach out to us if you're going to do that.
So yes, as Dave mentioned, and I can go over all of that, under MLS documents, this is where you will find, if you are not using Transaction Desk and you still want to be able to access the forms. I know Hank had a question, are these forms ready to go? So your answer is yes, they're in Transaction Desk as of this morning, but they're also in the MLS documents right in Paragon. So if you actually click open the COVID-19 folder, you'll see it right in MLS Docs. This will give you access to the toolkit that Dave is going over. It'll give you access to some help guides that we wrote. And it will also, if you are a broker, and you want to add these forms, I just created this yesterday. If you want to add these forms to your transaction desk packets, there's a how-to. I put big arrows so you know exactly where to click, and step-by-step how to add these into your form packets. And it'll tell you which form to put in which packet. So tried to make it as easy as possible there. And then to Dave's question about in showing time, let me pull up my listing here and I can show it to you that way. To go into showing time, you can, we have made everything default to virtual showing, as Dave mentioned. But if you go into your showing time, I'm going to go into maintain listings, because let's say I'm going to go ahead and change that. You can go right into maintaining your listing, or you can go right through showing time, whatever's easiest. And I'm going to click this open. And here's where you can actually make that distinction. So I can change this from virtual appointments to in-person and virtual appointments. Now, to address the question that came in, where would I put those forms? So if I wanted to, I'm just going to save that change here. If I wanted to go ahead and add those forms, you can do that per listing under your attachments. Let me shrink this up a little bit here. You'll see attachments right here to the left. And this is where we used to put in things like, you know, your seller's disclosure, your lead-based paint. A lot of people still do put those in there, so they're automatically sent to the agent who requests a showing. So again, if you wanted to add those forms, you could put them right in under attachments, and then the person requesting the showing would be given a copy of that form.
And then I saw somebody ask a question, if I have a form my own form that I want to put in my own library, and instead, who do I send those to? You would email those to Tracy at MiRealSource.net.
T DeWitt at MiRealSource.net.
Sorry, T DeWitt.
She's not just Tracy. That would be easier if we just all had our first names as our email at MiRealSource. Just circling back to some questions that didn't get answered yet. One question was back to rentals. Why can't the tenant clean in between showings in order to show while they are living there?
Well, the reason
this isn't in our control. This is the document that went out.
That's out of our control, and it's actually out of Mars control, because the way there's two things here going on here. There's what we just went over are the documents that were provided by Michigan Realtors. But overarching and on top of that is the governor's order. And the governor's order was very specific in that it said private showings may only be arranged for owner-occupied homes, vacant land, commercial property, and industrial property. And when Michigan Realtors asked what that meant, the answer came back that it was specifically leaving out the rentals. So, and you'll notice in Michigan Realtors document, they actually say that it means, you know, no rentals, no owner-occupied rentals. So it's not a case of could they, you know, if they would like to, it's not allowed under the governor's order.
All right, so I just want to let Hank know he was our winner for subscribing to our YouTube channel. That was the first notification I got. I know more people did, but Hank Mendez, you are the winner of the vintage candy basket. Some comments on here saying, oh, I didn't know the 80s was vintage. So
I kept the hairstyle. Does that count?
I was born in the 80s, so apparently I'm also vintage, being born in the 80s. So before the 80s, you're really retro, I guess. Thought that was kind of a funny remark. So Hank, you won. I will be reaching out to you. I actually think I have your information anyways, so we'll get that to you. I'll reach out if I still need something from you. But there was one question I think we missed. It was just, who do I email the forms to? I'm not sure. That was Tracy, right? I think that's what the question is referring to. So in the chat, I'm just going to write Tracy's email in here, just so everybody knows how to properly spell it. So if you need it. and you don't have it, I'm sure many people already have it, but just in case. And
Hey,
then,
Dave, should we
do you want to do one more prize yet, or do you want to save it a little bit more till the end?
Yeah, let's do the lots of dots and then we'll do the prize.
Okay.
So let's end on a good note, shall we? Let's talk about what we have. Dave, you want to tell us what the big news that we have coming?
I was excited to talk to Brian this morning, and he tells me that the data mapping for getting the MiRealSource dots, which are those pink ones on the left side of the state, is going very well. We were shooting for June 1st to have it available, but it looks like we might be a little bit ahead of that. So probably still sometime in May, we'll be able to release that information. So that's a lot more data sharing that's going to get us to over 30,000 realtors will be able to see our listings and vice versa. So really excited about that.
So that's like 92% of the state coverage, right, Dave?
Yep. And we're
That
still keep growing more after that.
So I'm excited. It's nice to be able to have more information than people looking on third-party sites will literally be able to see listings from coast to coast. So it's very cool. All right, Taylor, so we got one more prize?
Yep. Brian Brian asked you, Brian from our head of tech, he just said, is there any MLS that has more data than us?
No, there is not. Thanks, Brian.
Brag a little bit more, Dave. Hype it up a little bit.
I thought I did give him some kudos, but yeah, I'll give Brian even more kudos. Yes, Brian, you're right. We have more than anybody else. So thank you, Brian. And thank you, Brian.
Even more excited. Yes.
And then also about the cooperation and compensation too. Throw that in there, Dave, what that means. That was a good point Hank wanted you to mention to everybody.
Yeah, the new MiRealSource stuff is going to include cooperation and compensation, and it will be right in your Paragon. You don't have to go anywhere else to see it. So we're excited about that as well.
All right, yes, I'm going to take over.
You, Brian. Go take over.
All right.
All yours.
All right. Okay, so the last question, this is a little trivia question, I guess, but where would you go if you want to rewatch any of our webinars that we've been doing? Where do you go? There's two answers to this, two answers I will accept, but you can put that in the comment section. The first person to get that correct will win one of the retro baskets. So if you want to, all right, Charlene, you are right. Everything is on our YouTube channel. Many other people are right too by saying resources, correct. So YouTube channel is ultimately where you end up. This is where we have all of our information. Like I said, from classes and promo videos and little helpful tips and tricks videos that we do. And we even have more content coming soon that we'll be letting you know what's going to be on there. But many people said resources, correct. You can also go into Paragon's resources, and there's recorded webinars right there, and that's going to take you to our YouTube channel. There's playlists and everything organized for you on there. So anything that you want to rewatch, we upload those usually within a day or two from what.
Good morning, everyone.
Oh my God.
And there is our, that wasn't me, that was from your YouTube.
That threw me off for a second. I was like, Colleen, are you okay? All right, so Charlene, you are the winner of the retro basket. I will be reaching out to you as well to get your mailing address so we can get that sent to you. Just get your name written down. And Hank.
A lot of great questions today. That's really, really exciting.
You guys are running out of snacks during quarantine. This retro basket will help you out there. Right before summer, what everybody wants. All right, so great job, everybody. Lots of correct answers here. That's awesome. Charlene mentioned she's got 4 kids that will gobble that basket right up. So
Aww.
Let me just make sure any comments are covered real quick. And we ran over a little bit, but I think that's good because we had lots of questions and a lot of content to cover. So
we did.
Yeah.
Really good questions today, everybody. Thank you for your feedback and thank you for your good questions.
Yep. Thank you very much, everybody.
I think that's it.
Yeah. At least the ones that are coming through for me right now.
And Taylor and Colleen, thank you for doing these, mixing it up. So I think it's been very, very well received. I've had lots of great feedback and people want to know, are you guys going to keep doing them?
That's
Absolutely.
the plan. That's the plan. We have some guest speakers lined up that we're working on. So if you have any feedback on topics that you would like covered, go ahead and reach out to us through the MiRealSource meetings too when you register for the class, or just directly to Colleen and I, just some guest speakers that you would like, or topics you want covered, or just any kind of prizes you think would be cool. We are open to suggestions because we are doing this weekly, and content is kind of ever changing right now. Another thing I wanted to mention, we are on the lookout for somebody who is an Android whiz in terms of editing videos. We would like to have a speaker on that. So if you know an agent or somebody in the industry that is very good with Android apps, we are looking for somebody that could be a presenter on this Mixing It Up, as well as a real estate coach. So if you have any suggestions to us of somebody, please reach out and let us know. That's one of kind of one of them that we're thinking of, a couple of them that we're thinking about. So we appreciate some feedback there. And is there anything else that you want to mention, Colleen or Dave?
Yeah, I have really enjoyed reading the success stories. So please send us your successes. If you're finding something working in these, difficult times, or you're finding that you're having great success with a particular app or a particular thing that you're doing in your business, we would love to hear about it. We may ask you to even be a guest presenter and kind of help others with that. So please send us your success stories and the things that you're using may be a little different than others are.
All right,
And
I think we covered everything.
Thanks,
We'll review
everybody.
them. If it's something we
Thank you.
missed, we get a recap of all this, so we review them. But yeah, so thank you everyone, and stay healthy, be smart out there, and get these documents and read it all over front to back 10, 20 times if you need to. Because we have been, right?
Yep.
Yes, we have.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
everyone.
Thanks for joining.
Bye.